Good morning, everyone, and thank you so much for joining us today on this incredible discussion on trauma-informed law from concept to action. Today's presentation is brought to you by the National Center for Equity and Agency and EEO Now software. We are so honored to have these incredible panelists with us today. I would like to just take a moment starting out to allow each person to introduce themselves and to have them share how they are creating a more trauma-informed world and legal spaces and how that impacts their work. So Sam, could you start us out?
Most certainly. Hi, everybody. My name's Sam Dolce. I'm an attorney in New York. I'm also a settlement planner. So what I do is I work with people who have been through some of the worst things after they're receiving a civil lawsuit settlement, and I will help them move through that next phase, trying to figure out how to figure out their financial futures.
Awesome. Thank you so much. And Lisa?
Hello, everyone. Excited to be here. My name is Lisa Alexander, and I'm Executive Director of Stand Up Survivor and also a survivor of domestic violence. I'm the founder. We're located here in Orlando, Florida, and we focus on advocacy and assisting survivors of abuse get to safety.
Awesome. Thank you so much. And Kevin?
Hi, everybody. Kevin Kjellerup. I'm currently the Education and Training Administrator at the state of Florida's Attorney General's Office, and also a consultant in diversity, equity, and inclusion, and a survivor of PTSD and some treatment for that. And that's kind of what brought me into this fold. So I'm working with Laura and Lisa on a couple of other projects as well.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Okay, so to start out our conversation today, I'm going to give a quick overview on what trauma-informed care is for anyone who's new to it, or if you've heard multiple definitions through the years. So for me and for my firm, the way we define it is trauma-informed care is about understanding the depth and breadth of trauma in our world. It is then using that knowledge to actively work to not re-traumatize, and seeing every single person as a survivor. So not needing someone to disclose trauma to us, but assuming that most people, if not all people, have experienced multiple kinds of trauma, and again, to work through that perspective of not re-traumatizing them. It is changing the way we think from why are people like that to what is the root cause of behaviors? What is the story behind the different things that we see when we're dealing with people who might be labeled as difficult, and instead wanting to understand their trauma so that we can help them create the kind of life and experience that is healing and productive. So with that in mind, we want to ask everybody on this panel today, in what ways do trauma-informed practices change the way that you work with your clients, and also the way that people experience judicial proceedings? So Kevin, would you like to start us out with your thoughts on this?
Sure. As I mentioned, the education and training administrator. So a lot of what I deal with is helping to train and coach people through this understanding of trauma-informed lawyering, essentially, of identifying clients' trauma and understanding where that, comes from, to mitigating their strategies with that client now that they better understand where they're coming from. And we're doing leadership and management training as well, and we're teaching about how important empathy is, and active listening, and emotional intelligence, and so on. And so you have people who are actively engaged in really challenging questions, preparing for trial and so on, and we forget about the possibility of that vicarious trauma as well, that attorneys would end up not even recognizing it in themselves and not knowing why this was happening and so on. So that personal experience I told you about myself sort of drove me towards trying to have a better understanding of that. And then Dr. Laura helped me with some of the pedagogical ways that we're talking some of these attorneys through these processes, and then recognizing the environment of the courtroom. whether it's the behavior of a judge or opposing counsel or whatever it might be a triggering event. So how do you prepare, your client and yourself for those possibilities? And how do we sort of adapt how we, strategize the litigation to make that as easy as possible, or as the transition to being better able to adapt to those environments day after day after day, going through this process of trial. So that's the main areas where it enters into what I'm doing, is helping coaching and training attorneys. And then the National Association for Attorneys General for Training and Research Institute, I'm on the advisory board for that. And we're trying to implement this kind of an idea with that organization as well, so we can spread it out further than just Florida. So that's the next area of, or avenue, that I enter into with this process.
Thank you so much for sharing that and for being passionate about these things and at such a high level. It's incredible. Lisa, I'd love to hear your thoughts as well.
That's awesome, Kevin. I love it. As a survivor, it's so important. We know that when someone comes in our doors, they've experienced trauma. So we already know that coming in the gate. But I can even just share from my own personal experience, sitting in a courtroom with the magistrate, sitting in a courtroom with the judge, and them not understanding why I'm physically shaking, why I'm hysterical, why tears are running down my face, why I'm fighting for my children, why I'm fighting for batterer's intervention, and not getting the support that was needed. And that's why I've become such a huge advocate for it myself, and sitting on the Domestic Violence Commission here in Orlando, letting the attorneys and the judges and those in leadership know, we need, as survivors, a voice. We need you to know that we're not just a client that has come to you for help. We're a person, we have feelings, we've been through trauma. And of course, I understand attorneys, and they didn't go to school necessarily for feelings like we did for psychology. That is not, but it's understanding. That's why I love this so much. It's understanding that in every aspect and walk of life, people have experienced trauma, right? And so we're not coming to you just for a divorce. We're coming for you knowing our lives were almost taken. Our children were exposed to violence, and we need you to be our voice. As survivors of abuse, we haven't had that voice. And so when we're looking at our attorney and you're speaking for us in court, we want to be heard. And so oftentimes, and we've seen this most recently in the news, the abuser is calm and collected and the survivor is looking hysterically. And everyone's like, what's wrong with her? What's wrong with them? Well, it's because we've been traumatized. And we're not expecting, I think, from the law aspect, for you to dive into the depths of our domestic violence and what we encountered, but understand that we've experienced trauma. And to sit with that and understand our story enough and so I say our, because I have been out for 12 years, but I'm a survivor of abuse, and I deal with these survivors every day. And I know what they need and what their voices, how they want their voices to be heard through the legal aspect, through the judges, through the court system, through the clerks, because they have been silenced for so long. So there's oftentimes, they'll forget things. Things won't be in chronological order. They may not remember something. That doesn't mean they're lying. That means they've been traumatized, and that affects the brain and the memory. And so really remembering that when it comes to dealing with survivors of any type of trauma, and specifically we're talking here about, of course, domestic and sexual abuse.
Yes, thank you so much for sharing that. And that is the ongoing conversation that we're hoping to have. Again, we don't expect legal professionals, paralegals, mediators, attorneys, judges to become psych majors, right? Or to change their career and become a therapist. We're not asking for that. We're asking for people to have a working, actionable knowledge about these things. Like you're saying, understanding that reactions that are often categorized as, this person's overly emotional, therefore they're not telling the truth, their story doesn't add up, they keep remembering new information, that being a sign of lying, right? All these things are actually signs of trauma, and that people probably are being very authentic and telling the truth. And we know that things like false reports and such are so small, and yet again, often in the media are so blown out of proportion as, well, this is the common experience. And that affects the way that legal proceedings happen. Sam, I know you have a lot of thoughts on this as well. I'd love to hear yours.
So I like to approach it from
when you're building your law firm, you're building your practice, I should say, what kind of systems are you putting in place to make sure that you're treating people as human beings, and you're connecting with them on emotional and personal level, as well as just on a client management relationship level. And so a lot of what I focus on is, I'm not a survivor. So for me, it's, this is something of the people that I work closest with, my clients, how can I positively impact their day, their week, their life, right? And so I'm really kind of approaching this from a systematic perspective. What are the things that we can put into places in our law firms? What are the things that we can put into places in our businesses that will make sure that when we're encountering the world, which is full of people who have been through all sorts of things, they're going to be able to react to us in a positive way, and we're going to be able to provide them the best service possible. And so to me, a lot of this goes beyond just the one-on-one interaction, treating someone who walks into your office as a person, because I think a lot of trial attorneys are really, really good at that. I think they're really good at connecting with people. But maybe they're not putting the practices into place in their office that help encourage that for their entire staff, or the entire way somebody interacts with their law firm. And so what I really try to focus on are those small little systematic changes that make a really big difference to the way your clients react to you, and the way that you are able to present your law firm, your services to the world.
Exactly. This is good business practice, right? If people are like, I don't know if I connect to all the psychosocial, emotional stuff. Well, this is just good business, is treating people in these ways. It leads to higher client satisfaction, increased referrals, right? All those things that do impact people's bottom lines that, you know, speaks to another sector of this audience.
I'm not saying that's the only reason to do it, right?
No.
But I'm just saying I want to be here to represent that perspective, because I've seen it within our own business.
Exactly. And we have to have both pieces of that conversation. Because again, there's some folks who are listening to this and they're already like, I'm bought into this. This is awesome. I'm all for it. And there's people who are like, I need to know how this is going to work out in the numbers. And we want to say this is for everybody. This speaks to all of those pieces, and it benefits every single person in any area of law. Kevin, I saw your hand raised. Did you have something you want to add?
I think both Lisa and Sam sort of handled it, but Jennifer had a really insightful comment and question in the chat that I wanted to make sure that we addressed, but I think that they probably have. And Jennifer, if we haven't, let us know through the chat again, or anybody else, who has that. I didn't know about the process, whether we're going to do it at the end or something like that, but she just made this great point about just treating people as human beings. It really does sort of get us through a lot of these sort of challenging things that if we understood in an empathetic way, that we've gone through some of the same sorts of things, and some of it hits harder than others, depending on our ability to handle it and so on. So I just wanted to make sure we address that, and thank Jennifer for that comment. It's really insightful.
Yes, thank you so much. And we will have time for questions at the end. Okay. I did want to move on now, talking about, yes, treating people as people and seeing them holistically. Today is both Indigenous Peoples Day and National Coming Out Day. This is Domestic Violence Awareness Month. We have a lot of intersectionality just in October. But talking about today's days in particular, we know that for BIPOC and LGBTQ clients, judicial systems come with a plethora of historical traumas. And I'd love to hear anyone's thoughts on how this knowledge impacts your work in trauma-informed care.
Well, I'll jump in. I will say that oftentimes working with those in the LGBTQIA+ community, it is challenging. We did a workshop earlier this year, Dr. Laura, about that. And okay, they're survivors of abuse, but on top of that, they have a stigma, another stigma on top of that, and then trying to get the assistance they need on top of that. And so it can be layer upon layer of challenges. And so in order, something like this really minimizes that, so that they can skip through all of the bias and the layers and the things that will come against them and be seen as an individual in need of assistance, regardless of anything that tries to come against them. being a survivor or anything else. So I will just jump in and say that they deserve the same care and treatment. And we've learned that through when we're looking at resources for those domestic violence resources for those in the community. They're scarce, but why? They experience abuse at the same level, you know, as heterosexual relationships. So why are the resources not the same there for them as well? And so this really helps to break through a bit of the mess and get them the assistance that they need.
Thank you for that. Exactly. Sam or Kevin, thoughts on this?
To sort of, I mean, build off the answer that was already given. I mean, a lot of the times when they're calling me, I'm the 10th attorney they've talked to, right? Their case is already resolved and I'm the one building the trust and, you know, helping them sort of plan their future. And they've already talked to a lot of people. They don't want to talk to one more, right? Just one more white guy in a suit. And at that point, there's really going to be a barrier to communication because a lot of the times people they're already fed up and they've already been traumatized by this. Like our legal system is still traumatizing people. And I mean, they've already gone through all of that. And so it's going to be how are we going to be able to communicate with this individual? How are we going to be able to communicate with this person as a human being? How are we going to be able to connect with them? And so we actually have to have trainings for our staff and how to do that. And we have to have retrainings and we have to have a point of emphasis that we want their call to us to be like a positive moment of their day. And that is really, really difficult with the populations that we work with a lot of the time. But it doesn't mean it isn't worthy to try to do it. So I guess my answer is, I think the current legal system is still traumatizing people. So addressing the historical traumas as well as the current traumas, I mean, it's about putting into place systems into your business or into your practice that are going to allow for better outcomes for those people.
Thank you so much for that. Yes, and I know when I did my training with your team, we talked about historical trauma, and a lot of your staff members really connected to that piece and saying, yeah, this is an aspect that we will often overlook because we're just looking at the immediate situation someone's coming through when they're working with you, and thinking about, yeah, all of those traumas that are triggered when we're interacting with people who often represent, you know, systems and identities that have enacted this kind of colonization and abuse, and making sure that we're not part of that problem very intentionally.
I mean, to make it concrete, we work with a lot of people who, I'm sorry, my office door is a little loud. There's a bunch of kids coming through. Sorry about that. So we work with a lot of people who are receiving settlements for Esher, which was a birth device that mostly impacted women of color who receive Medicaid. And historically, a lot of those families have not really had positive interactions with the legal system, and receiving their settlement may or may not have been a positive interaction itself. It may not have felt like enough, or it may not have been a good enough situation. Now left them so much better off as they were hoping for. But then again, those people still need a plan, right? They still need to protect their benefits. They still need to figure out a budget. They still need to figure out what their life's going to look like moving forward, especially because many of them are now carrying a disability, where there's a whole nother bias we can talk around about ableism and how that interacts with the law. But really, when you're trying to connect with those individuals, we had to sit down as a team and talk about that and try to figure out how are we going to be able to connect with these people day after day after day, and then how are our staff going to be able to take care of themselves, because many of them have been through a similar sort of historical trauma within their own families. And we were able to slowly sort of figure it out, I hope. Not every interaction is positive, right? But we hope to create as many as possible.
Thank you so much for that. Yes. Kevin, love to hear your thoughts.
I couldn't add much to what they were already saying, except, we're in Florida, the home of the Mississippian people that turned into the Seminole tribe that we are still, in legal discussions with about recognition, and some of the trauma is cultural trauma that exists, as well as individual trauma being part of those cultures and so on. So we're just trying to build that into whatever curriculum and training that we can develop for our attorneys to better understand those circumstances, so that they can deal with the clients, or a lot of times the clients are state agencies and so on, and we're doing things like antitrust and consumer protection and Medicaid fraud and statewide prosecution, where the opposing or the people we're representing are members of those communities, BIPOC community in particular, like Sam was pointing out, that they're disadvantaged disproportionately in a lot of the cases that we're dealing with in all of those areas, and coming in, as Lisa said, traumatized already with a history of it. How are we going to represent that better? So hopefully, I think what you're about to talk about next is how we can do that even more so for everyone. So that's been our experience with it so far. Yeah.
Thank you. And I think that perspective, from a statewide lens is so vital as well. Sam, I'd like to ask you a question directly now, and that is, we've talked a lot about how this informs our work with our clients externally, but I'd love to know how this kind of education has transformed your internal culture. If you've seen more resiliency, more ability to kind of navigate those difficult days and moments when things are high pressure and high stress, how that's kind of manifested for your firm.
I would say we talk about it more. That's a big part of it. We work with a lot of survivor clients no one's ever getting, we were a lot of people who are receiving a lot of money, and no one's ever getting a lot of money for a good thing. And so I'll have late calls, like late at night, someone will call and say, I just had to read through this and I spoke with this person for 3 hours and let's just talk about it for a couple hours. That helps. That makes a difference. Your team needs that. No matter how business and just this is the legal, we're going to push this through, your team needs that. They may not be telling you that, but they do. The other part is, we've changed a lot of the ways that we try to communicate with clients. We try to limit like a call center experience, make it more of like, this is the person that you're going to be talking to from the beginning to the end. Even if a lot of the times there's an accountant, a fiduciary, a trust attorney, another attorney in a differing state, a co-counsel, and of counsel, right? There's all these different pieces. We try to make sure that they have one contact person with a cell phone number. It isn't always possible, right? So like sometimes that's just not going to work. A lot of times it will. And you'd be surprised at how willing your staff is to do it and to give out contact information. We have work cell phones where you're able to turn them off after work hours, but during work hours, they're expected to be on. Just making it, a lot of this is communication based. So it's making it easier to communicate, making sure it's not someone interacting with another system, but someone interacting with a person. We've seen that has had a really dramatic, positive outcome with a lot of people.
Thank you so much. And Kevin, your work in particular with the Attorney General's office and being the person who's in charge of so much of this training, how is the training, these conversations, this awareness that you're just planting these seeds of now, how do you think that has impacted how attorney generals and judges are starting to practice law differently and see these cases in a new light?
Well, in a lot of cases, we'll come to see it in the future when we reach a lot of these other agencies around the country. Our particular Attorney General is very interested in the trauma-informed care of, for example, most recently, the Backing the Blue program. She's a huge advocate and recognizes this organization as often as they possibly can, and it points out that part of what a lot of us miss about that national push for Backing the Blue is these are human beings who are suffering trauma on a regular basis. And, you know, just to be fair with everybody, they're also inflicting some, you know, but that we can't forget, as Jennifer pointed out, and we've been highlighting a little bit here, that's another human being. Regardless of what groups they belong to, or how we might further define them as other, they're still human. And to that degree, our AG has that perspective about everybody that we serve, that whether it's, you know, price gouging, or, you know, committing fraud, or whatever it is that the people of the state of Florida are being protected by and represented by attorneys that work for the Attorney General's office. If that isn't our priority mission, then we're failing the people. It's not transactional attorney work as much as it is making sure the people that we represent are recognized and identified and understood to the point where we can actually, you know, successfully represent their interests and their needs be met. So, you know, when we reach those other state attorneys general's offices, and maybe nationally with NAGTRI and so on, it'll really start to, we'll be able to start to see it a little bit more. But the metrics for it right now are just, you know, outcomes based. How are things better for our clients now than they were before we started to become aware of these kinds of things? Yeah, but we'll get better at it.
No, exactly. That's why we're having this conversation today,
Right.
is get people engaged and excited. And I think you actually bring up such an interesting point there about the fact that oftentimes we still, even in a trauma-informed conversation, put people in boxes, right? Oh, this person's the survivor and this person's the villain in the story. And often the people who are part of enacting harm have received it and are traumatized as well, right? And that makes this complex, but here's the reality: human beings we're really complex creatures, you know? And that's one of the reasons I'm so passionate about restorative practices, right? That even when there has to be a consequence for an action, there has to be atonement and awareness for it, that it still needs to be restorative rather than punitive. So thank you for bringing that up.
Yeah.
Lisa, I'd love to get your thoughts as someone who works directly with domestic violence survivors and is one, as I am as well. You know, I remember, you know, many times trying to go to a crisis center and get support and asking the therapists and victim advocates, like, who should I have represent me? And they'll say, I think I heard something kind of good about this person, give them a call. And they're like, oh, I don't do cases with any kind of abuse. And then you're just like jumping around from person to person, or someone will say, oh, this person's a real bulldog, and they'll get you a win. You're like, but are they going to be supportive? Do they understand financial abuse is in 99% of domestic violence cases? And so I don't have a lot of financial resources because they're really expensive, right? There's not often answers to these questions that are easy to come by. And again, that's one of the reasons we want to certify people, so it's clear that they can know who to go to and who's differentiate themselves in that way. But I'd love to hear, you know, any thoughts, experiences you've had both with attorneys and clients on finding each other and finding those right fits.
Well, honestly, I think you just said it. We point them in a direction of someone who may be able to help them, and then they're turned down. We'll take the case, but with financial issues and concerns, they can't take it. An attorney doesn't care, they just want their money. But 99% of domestic violence cases have financial abuse. So oftentimes, and I want to make this clear, all survivors of abuse are not broke. But with 99% of them experiencing financial abuse, there are financial challenges. So we're looking at being willing to take a payment plan, understanding the trauma that they experience, so that at least enough to be able to be gentle and caring with them and compassionate. And one thing I love about this training in particular is that it can reach any attorney, right? I recently had a personal injury attorney that I was working with. And when I talk about caring and compassionate and patient, and I didn't feel very rushed. And we're talking about domestic violence, and he was able to share that he recently had a client who had experienced this and was going through this. So we were able to help on that front. But if they're educated, regardless of the type of regardless of the type of law that they practice, personal injury, malpractice, like Sam, settlement, whatever it is that you practice, be able to be trauma informed so that you're able to recognize and carefully deal with your clients. And one thing we haven't really touched on so far yet, but I'm sure that you will, is that part of the trauma-informed care is caring for the attorney as well. Because there's secondary trauma, right? Even in the field that we work with as not attorneys, I mean, there is secondary trauma dealing with survivor after survivor, experience after experience. And this really teaches you how to care for yourself, right? Because we don't want you to be burnt out. We don't want you to have any kind of secondary trauma that holds you back as an attorney of doing what you need to do. And so it's really, I'd love for us to have a database of trauma-informed attorneys that we can say, oh, absolutely, contact this attorney, contact this attorney. They will understand, they will walk with you through this journey, and they will be able to help you in your case. That would be golden, because survivor after survivor that we work with. My attorney didn't care. I didn't have enough money. But my partner was rich, so they had an attorney and I had nobody. And I mean, I know it sounds really simplistic and simple, but we're talking about children's lives. We're talking about survivors. We're talking about individuals who have been through trauma and literally just kind of need support. Someone to join elbows with them, someone to say, I understand, what you're going through, and here's what we can do. I understand what you've been through, and this is how we can support you on your journey. Divorce, forget about it. We're talking about experiencing, they don't want to just get divorced. We're not just looking for a divorce attorney, but we're looking for someone who will support them and understanding that abusers will continue to abuse if they don't get help. So are we implementing batterers intervention programs? Are we ensuring that they have the continued support that they need? And so that is some of my feedback, but I can go on forever about that stuff, but that is why I love this training. It's imperative on both sides, not just attorneys with survivors, but for attorneys for attorneys.
Exactly. Thank you so much. And that is one of our goals. Now that we are finally able to do this in person, we have our first training in White Plains, New York, November 15th and 16th. We then will be planning a number in Florida and in Virginia in the spring of next year, and then connecting directly to therapists and crisis centers and saying, here's a list of people that want to work with the survivors that come through your doors, that are interested in engagement, who also have taken the step, not just to have awareness, but to have accountability. Because without credentialing, then there's nowhere for people to go if someone says, oh yeah, I took that training, I'm aware of this stuff. And then if they enact further harm or they're not following through on any of those practices in a really egregious way, there now is a place where people can go and say, I don't think they're following through on this. Can you, address that with them? And so having that full system where we know exactly who we can go to and there's accountability on all fronts is really a transformative experience. And we're excited to be offering this finally after all that we've gone through with COVID. And so we're looking forward to that this year and next. I wanted to take a few moments for some questions now. I think we had some in the chat. And some comments as well. And yes, a lot of people are saying this is right. Part of trainings that they have had some awareness, treating people like human beings. And yes, to the comment that the certification will have more information if you want to email us, but we'll also be posting this on YouTube and sharing it on our newsletter where you can get any details if you want to sign up. So I'd like to kind of open this last few minutes to final thoughts. And also if people want to get in contact with you as individuals and hear about the amazing stuff you're doing with your organizations, how they can do that. So Sam, let's start with you. Any final thoughts and how can people learn more about Milestone?
Sorry, I was muted. You can find out more about Milestone. You can always go to our website, milestone7th.com. You can always email me directly, sdolce@milestone7th.com. Or you can just give me a call. My phone number is all over the internet. You'll find me. There is the main thing I really just want to talk about to close is the idea of we need to educate attorneys. We need to be in their ear telling them why this matters. I think that as a member of the bar, I have a responsibility to do that with my colleagues. And I think that as leaders of these types of thought movements, We need to be able to inform both judges, attorneys, those who work for attorneys. We haven't been doing this for very long, right? This is just the past several decades. And the root of our legal system goes back hundreds of years. And so if we're going to make this an lasting change, it has to come from all sorts of places. There's not one person that's leading this movement. It's something that's going to happen with all of us doing a little bit every day. And so don't lose. If you come across that trial attorney on the other side that doesn't care about your client's plight, if you are hearing the attorneys who are joking at the bar after about the person who's crying in the courtroom, don't be afraid to speak up. And if you fear isolation or a change in your ability to practice, make the smart decisions, but also this is important, and this changes people's lives. I've seen it firsthand as a trial attorney and as a settlement planner. And so what I would encourage people to do is, a lot of people don't click on this webinar unless they already know about this stuff, but maybe the attorney across the aisle from you doesn't, right? And so maybe, all lawyers are connected to more lawyers, right? And so talk to people, seriously, it helps.
Thank you. Thank you for that. Absolutely. We are all, this is like an ocean of a problem, right? And we are all drops in that solution. And it will take everybody getting on board and starting to have that positive peer pressure, that kind of bystander intervention, right? Of saying like, this isn't funny. Let's not let this escalate. Let's not make this a thing that is normalized, of looking down on people who are having emotional experiences, reactions. So thank you for being part of that change. Lisa, I'd love to hear your thoughts and how people can get connected to Stand Up Survivor as well.
Sam, that was just so good. I just want to say that was so good. I really felt that. I thought that was really good. And I don't really know what to say after that because it was so good. But I will say to remember that when we're dealing with people, everyone has faced their own trauma. Regardless of what line of work, walking down the supermarket aisle, everyone has experienced trauma. So if we deal with people like that, we'd be able to be more compassionate. And I think recognizing that we're here to support you. We're here to offer the certification to encourage you so that across the board, people can be trauma informed. Like Sam said, this has been going on forever. The history of law is hundreds of years, but trauma informed care is more recent and more new, and we all can benefit from being more trauma informed. Stand Up Survivor, we're on all social media platforms. Standupsurvivor.org is our website, and we are here to advocate for survivors. We support survivors. We help them get to safety. We encourage them to have a voice, and we speak for them until they can speak for themselves. We safety plan and help them get to safety and ensure that they have the resources that they need to not just survive their situation, but thrive in life after. So, and of course, my phone number is right behind us there as well. So.
Awesome. Thank you so much. I just thought there was a question in the chat. We do offer virtual trainings. Yes, you can reach out to us at equityandagency.org or .com, and we will connect you to those resources. But we also have these in-person certifications, and those are on site, but they're throughout the country, and you can also host one. Kevin, would love to hear your final thoughts, and if people want to get in touch with you for your consulting work on DEI issues, how they can do that.
Well, I've included my contact information that way in the chat box for everybody, so you have that stored there. And just to thanks so much for putting me after Lisa and Sam. Yeah, obviously you've got some great resources here for everybody, and I couldn't have said it better than Sam did, except to thank him the way Lisa did. And so that's all been taken care of as well, except to say thank you to Laura for introducing me to this, community and to this discussion. And hopefully, as a lot of people were saying in the chat, we can continue this through networking other, attorneys, the way Sam was talking about. Each one of us reaching out to at least one more brings that community that much larger and fuller and diverse and inclusive and all of those things, right? So that would be mine, is that continue that communication. recognize and award and reward the community that we have, so that we can grow it in a responsible way, and to get in touch with you to figure out ways to do that, because you're one of the better networkers I've ever met in my life, and obviously a diverse professional experience as well. So lots of different areas that you could help a lot of people in, including how much you've helped me already. So I appreciate that. Thank you all.
Thank you so much. Thank you for everyone who joined us live. Like I said, we will have this recording available for anyone who wants to share it, watch it later, use it as a platform to start discussions in your community. Truly, like, show this to everyone at your bar association and say, what do you think? What should we be doing with this information? All right, thank you again. Everyone have a wonderful rest of your week and keep being the change you want to see in the world. Take care.